The morning sun cast long shadows across the training compound as Sarah Chen adjusted her civilian clothes one last time. The oversized hoodie and worn jeans were carefully chosen to make her appear smaller, more vulnerable. Her long black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup to enhance the illusion of youth and inexperience. At 28, Sarah was one of the most elite operators in the Navy SEALs. But today, she needed to look like an ordinary woman who had wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. The mission briefing had been clear but unusual. Intelligence suggested that a group of Marines stationed at Camp Pendleton had been involved in questionable activities during their off-duty hours. Reports of harassment and aggressive behavior toward civilian women near the base had reached the higher-ups, but concrete evidence remained elusive. The accused Marines were skilled at avoiding official scrutiny, and their commanding officers needed proof before taking action. Sarah's assignment was simple in concept, but dangerous in execution. She would pose as a lost civilian who had accidentally entered a restricted training area where the 5 Marines were conducting an unauthorized exercise. Her job was to observe their behavior when they encountered what they believed to be a vulnerable woman alone and document any misconduct. What made this mission particularly sensitive was that it had to appear completely natural, with no backup immediately visible. The intelligence file had provided detailed information about each of the 5 Marines. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres was the unofficial leader, a decorated veteran with 3 combat deployments who had recently returned from Afghanistan. His record showed exemplary service, but several unsubstantiated complaints had been filed against him by local women. Corporal James Mitchell was younger but equally problematic, with a reputation for aggressive behavior that his superiors had somehow overlooked. The other 3 Marines, Lance Corporal Danny Walsh, Private First Class Kevin Brown, and Lance Corporal Alex Rivera, had clean records individually, but intelligence suggested they followed Torres and Mitchell's lead in questionable activities. Sarah had studied their psychological profiles extensively. Torres was intelligent and calculating, likely to test boundaries gradually. Mitchell was more impulsive and direct in his aggression. The others would probably follow their lead unless the situation escalated beyond their comfort zone. The key was to appear helpless enough to trigger their worst instincts while remaining ready to defend herself if necessary. As she walked toward the designated area, Sarah's mind ran through the equipment concealed on her person. A tiny camera was embedded in her hoodie's drawstring, positioned to capture audio and video of any interactions. A GPS tracker was sewn into her shoe, allowing her handlers to monitor her exact location. Most importantly, a small panic device was concealed in her sleeve, capable of summoning immediate backup if the situation became truly dangerous. The training area was isolated, surrounded by dense brush and far from the main base facilities. It was perfect for the Marines' unauthorized activities and equally perfect for Sarah's mission. The morning air was crisp, and the only sounds were distant helicopter training exercises and the occasional bird call. Sarah had memorized the terrain during previous reconnaissance, knowing every escape route and potential hiding spot. As she rounded a bend in the dirt path, she spotted the 5 Marines exactly where intelligence had predicted they would be. They were dressed in partial combat gear, carrying training weapons, and appeared to be conducting some kind of tactical exercise. Their equipment was legitimate, but their presence in this restricted area during off-duty hours was not. Sarah took a deep breath and began her performance. She stumbled slightly as she walked, looking around with apparent confusion and concern. Her body language conveyed uncertainty and growing fear as she realized she might be in the wrong place. Everything about her appearance and behavior was designed to trigger a protective instinct in honorable men or predatory instincts in those with darker intentions. Staff Sergeant Torres was the first to notice her. He held up his hand, signaling the others to stop their exercise, and all 5 Marines turned to stare at the unexpected civilian in their midst. Sarah could see them exchanging glances and quick hand signals, communicating in the efficient manner of experienced soldiers. Their body language immediately shifted from focused training mode to something more predatory. Sarah continued walking toward them, maintaining the illusion that she hadn't fully grasped the potential danger of her situation. She clutched a folded map in her hands, playing the role of a lost tourist or hiker who had wandered into a restricted military area. Her heartbeat remained steady despite the performance, years of training having taught her to control her physiological responses under stress. Torres stepped forward first, his expression initially appearing helpful and concerned. His voice carried the authority of his rank, but also a subtle undertone that made Sarah's trained instincts immediately alert. The other Marines spread out slightly, not quite surrounding her, but positioning themselves in a way that would make escape difficult for an ordinary civilian. The conversation began innocuously enough, with Torres asking if she was lost and offering help with directions. Sarah played her part perfectly, expressing gratitude for their assistance while subtly conveying vulnerability and naivety about military protocol. She explained that she was trying to find a hiking trail and had apparently taken a wrong turn somewhere. Mitchell moved closer during the conversation, his body language more overtly aggressive than Torres. While Torres maintained a facade of helpfulness, Mitchell's intentions were clearer and more immediately threatening. The three junior Marines watched the interaction carefully, clearly waiting for cues from their superiors about how to proceed. As the conversation continued, Sarah noticed the subtle changes in their behavior that confirmed the intelligence reports. Torres began asking personal questions that had nothing to do with giving directions. Mitchell made comments about her appearance that crossed professional boundaries. The others grew bolder in their stares and positioning, clearly emboldened by their leader's behavior. Sarah maintained her cover perfectly, responding to their questions with appropriate nervousness and gratitude. Internally, she was cataloging every word and action, building the case that would ultimately expose their misconduct. The camera in her hoodie was capturing everything, and her GPS tracker was providing real-time location data to her handlers. The situation began to escalate when Torres suggested that she might need a more thorough escort to ensure she found her way safely. His tone remained superficially helpful, but the implications were clear. Mitchell added that the area could be dangerous for a woman alone, especially one who was obviously unfamiliar with military territory. The three junior Marines moved closer, completing what was now clearly an encirclement. Sarah allowed appropriate concern to show on her face while maintaining her grateful demeanor. She thanked them for their concern, but indicated that she could find her way with the directions they had provided. This was the crucial test. Would they accept her polite refusal and allow her to leave, or would they reveal their true intentions? Torres exchanged a meaningful look with Mitchell before responding that they couldn't in good conscience allow her to wander around alone in such a dangerous area. His voice carried a finality that made it clear this was not really a suggestion. Mitchell added that they had specific orders about civilians in restricted areas, a lie that Sarah's knowledge of military protocol allowed her to immediately identify. The junior Marines moved even closer, and Sarah realized that the situation was about to transition from verbal intimidation to something more serious. Their body language had shifted completely from helpful servicemen to predators who had identified vulnerable prey. The isolated location and their confident demeanor suggested they had done this before and believed they could act with impunity. Sarah's training kicked into high gear as she prepared for what would come next. Every muscle in her body was ready to respond, but she maintained her frightened civilian facade. The mission required her to gather as much evidence as possible while ensuring her own safety. The balance between appearing helpless and being ready to defend herself required split-second timing and perfect judgment. Torres stepped closer and reached out as if to take her arm, ostensibly to guide her to safety, but clearly with less honorable intentions. This was the moment when their true nature would be fully revealed, and Sarah would have the evidence needed to bring them to justice. Her hand moved slightly toward the panic device in her sleeve, ready to summon backup if the situation escalated beyond her ability to control. The morning sun continued to shine down on what appeared to be 5 Marines helping a lost civilian, but Sarah knew that appearances could be deceiving. In the next few moments, these men would learn that their intended victim was far from helpless, and their careers in the Marines would come to an abrupt and disgraceful end. Tor's hand was inches from Sarah's arm when she made her decision. The mission had gathered sufficient evidence of their intentions, and the situation was escalating beyond the point where she could maintain her cover without serious risk. In one fluid motion that seemed impossible for someone who had appeared so helpless moments before, Sarah stepped back and assumed a combat stance that immediately changed the entire dynamic of the encounter. The transformation was so sudden and complete that all 5 Marines froze in shock. The frightened civilian had vanished, replaced by someone whose posture, balance, and alertness screamed military training of the highest caliber. Sarah's eyes had hardened into the focused gaze of a warrior, and every line of her body conveyed lethal competence. Mitchell was the first to react, his aggressive nature overriding his confusion. He lunged forward, apparently believing he could overpower what he still assumed was just a woman with some basic self-defense training. His mistake became clear within seconds, as Sarah demonstrated movement skills that far exceeded anything he had encountered in standard Marine combat training. Sarah's response was precise and devastating. She caught Mitchell's reaching arm, used his own momentum against him, and sent him flying into the nearest tree with a technique that combined elements of jiu-jitsu and military close-quarters combat. The impact was loud enough to echo through the training area, and Mitchell slumped to the ground, conscious but clearly stunned by both the physical impact and the impossibility of what had just happened. Walsh and Brown, the two junior Marines, immediately stepped back in confusion and growing alarm. Their training told them to support their fellow Marines, but their instincts warned them that this situation had become something far beyond their understanding. They looked to Torres for guidance, but their staff sergeant was staring at Sarah with the dawning realization that everything they thought they knew about this encounter was wrong. Rivera, perhaps thinking that numbers still provided an advantage, moved to flank Sarah from the right side. His approach was tactical and careful, showing that he at least understood they were no longer dealing with an ordinary civilian. Sarah tracked his movement with peripheral vision while keeping her primary focus on Torres, correctly identifying him as the most dangerous threat despite Mitchell's greater aggression. Sarah's voice, when she finally spoke, carried an authority that made all 5 Marines instinctively want to stand at attention. Her tone was calm, controlled, and absolutely confident as she addressed Torres directly. She informed him that this had been a sanctioned military operation to investigate reports of misconduct, and that every moment of their interaction had been recorded and transmitted to their commanding officers. The revelation hit Torres like a physical blow. His mind raced through the implications of what Sarah was telling him, and the growing horror on his face showed that he understood exactly how much trouble they were all in. His decorated military career, his reputation, his pension, and his freedom were all suddenly in jeopardy because of actions he had thought would never face consequences. Rivera continued his flanking maneuver, either not hearing Sarah's revelation or choosing to ignore it in favor of salvaging what he saw as an increasingly desperate situation. His movement was skilled and showed good tactical thinking, but he was operating at a level of training that was simply inadequate for the opponent he faced. Sarah allowed Rivera to commit to his approach before demonstrating why Navy SEAL training was considered the pinnacle of military combat preparation. Her counter-movement was so fast and efficient that Rivera found himself on the ground before he fully understood what had happened. Unlike Mitchell's dramatic collision with the tree, Rivera was simply and professionally neutralized with minimal force, left conscious, but completely unable to continue any aggressive action. Torres found his voice and demanded to know who Sarah was and what authority she had to conduct this operation. His training as a staff sergeant made him focus on chain of command and proper authorization even in his current predicament. Sarah's response was to calmly recite his full name, rank, service number, and recent assignment history, making it clear that this operation had been thoroughly planned and authorized at levels far above his pay grade. Brown and Walsh exchanged nervous glances, both clearly wanting to distance themselves from the situation, but uncertain how to do so without appearing to abandon their fellow Marines. Their body language showed they were calculating whether their minimal participation in the harassment might be overlooked if they cooperated fully with whatever investigation would follow. Mitchell struggled to his feet, shaking his head to clear the impact with the tree. His aggressive nature remained unchanged despite the demonstration of Sarah's capabilities, and he began moving toward her again with the stubborn determination of someone who refused to accept that he had been outclassed. His approach was more cautious this time, showing he had at least learned to respect her combat skills, even if he hadn't learned wisdom. Sarah's response to Mitchell's continued aggression was a perfect demonstration of escalation control. Instead of immediately neutralizing him again, she issued a clear verbal warning that his actions were being recorded and would be used as evidence of assault on a federal agent conducting an authorized investigation. Her tone made it clear that continued resistance would only make his situation worse. Torres attempted to assert some control over the situation by ordering his Marines to stand down. His command voice carried the authority of years of military leadership, but his orders were undermined by the obvious fact that he no longer controlled anything about this encounter. Mitchell hesitated at the order, but continued his advance, apparently beyond the point where military discipline could override his personal anger and humiliation. Sarah's handling of Mitchell's second attack was even more impressive than her first response. This time, she demonstrated the level of control that marked truly elite training. Instead of using Mitchell's momentum to slam him into another obstacle, she simply redirected his energy to place him in a submission hold that left him completely helpless but uninjured. The technique was so smooth and professional that it looked almost effortless. Brown made the smart decision to raise his hands and clearly distance himself from any further aggression. His action was noted and appreciated by Sarah, who acknowledged his choice with a brief nod while maintaining her control over Mitchell. Brown's decision would later prove wise when the formal investigation determined levels of responsibility and appropriate punishment. Walsh followed Brown's example, also raising his hands and stepping back. His face showed the relief of someone who realized he had narrowly avoided making a terrible situation much worse for himself. Both junior Marines began to understand that their best option was complete cooperation with whatever process would follow. Rivera remained on the ground where Sarah had placed him, not because he couldn't get up, but because he had enough tactical sense to recognize that resistance was futile. His position allowed him to observe the entire scene and reach the conclusion that they had attempted to assault someone whose training and authority were far beyond anything they were equipped to handle. Torres demanded to see Sarah's identification and authorization for the operation. Despite his predicament, his military training made him focus on proper procedure and documentation. Sarah's response was to reference specific regulation numbers and mention the names of senior officers who had authorized the investigation, information that Torres recognized as authentic and current. The morning sun had climbed higher during their encounter, and the sounds of routine base operations in the distance provided a surreal backdrop to what had become a life-changing moment for all 6 participants. Sarah maintained her professional demeanor while keeping Mitchell secure, monitoring the other Marines, and undoubtedly communicating through concealed devices with her support team. Mitchell continued to struggle against the submission hold despite its obvious futility. His behavior provided additional evidence of the aggressive tendencies that had led to the investigation in the first place. Each futile attempt to escape was being recorded and would become part of the formal record of his misconduct and refusal to follow lawful orders. Torres' mind was clearly racing through his options, trying to find some way to minimize the damage from what had become a career-ending disaster. His calculation of the situation showed the intelligence that had earned him his rank, but also revealed that he understood exactly how hopeless his position had become. The sound of approaching vehicles became audible in the distance, indicating that Sarah's backup and probably base security were responding to the situation. Torres recognized the sound and understood that the formal military justice process was about to begin, with all its implications for everyone involved in the incident. The convoy of military vehicles arrived with the precision and speed that marked a well-planned operation. 3 Humvees and a command vehicle approached the training area, their occupants including base security, military police, and senior officers who had been monitoring the entire situation from a remote location. Sarah's mission had been successful beyond the original parameters, providing not just evidence of misconduct, but a complete record of how the 5 Marines behaved when they believed they could act without consequences. Major General Patricia Williams emerged from the lead vehicle, her presence immediately commanding the attention and respect of everyone present. As the base commanding officer, she had personally authorized Sarah's mission after reviewing months of complaints and suspicious incidents involving the same group of Marines. Her expression was stern but controlled as she surveyed the scene, taking in Mitchell still held securely by Sarah, Torres standing rigidly at attention, and the 3 junior Marines who had wisely chosen cooperation over continued resistance. Sarah maintained her professional composure while releasing Mitchell from the submission hold. Her movements were smooth and controlled, demonstrating the discipline that marked elite military training. Mitchell immediately stepped back, rubbing his arm where the hold had been applied, but his aggressive demeanor had finally been replaced by the dawning understanding of how serious his situation had become. The military police moved efficiently to establish a secure perimeter and begin the formal documentation process that would be required for the courts-martial that would inevitably follow. Their professionalism was evident as they treated all 5 Marines with appropriate respect, while ensuring that evidence was properly preserved and witness statements were accurately recorded. Colonel James Rodriguez, the base's senior legal officer, approached Sarah for her initial report. His questions were precise and focused on ensuring that every aspect of the operation had been conducted within proper legal and military guidelines. Sarah's responses demonstrated not only her tactical expertise, but also her thorough understanding of military law and procedure. Torres requested permission to speak with Major General Williams privately, apparently hoping to negotiate some resolution that might salvage his career. His request was noted but denied, with Williams explaining that the formal investigation process would provide appropriate opportunities for him to present any relevant information or mitigation factors. The recording equipment that had documented the entire encounter was carefully removed and secured by military police technicians. The video and audio evidence would be crucial in the formal proceedings that would follow, providing an objective record of events that could not be disputed or minimized through creative interpretation. Brown and Walsh were separated and interviewed individually to ensure that their accounts of events were not influenced by discussion with their fellow Marines. Both men provided full cooperation and expressed remorse for their participation in what they now understood had been criminal behavior. Their level of involvement and willingness to cooperate would be important factors in determining their eventual punishment. Rivera was also interviewed separately, and his tactical understanding of what had occurred made his account particularly valuable to investigators. His recognition of Sarah's superior training and his decision to cease resistance once the situation became clear would be noted favorably in his record, though it would not eliminate consequences for his initial participation in the harassment. Mitchell's interview was more challenging, as his aggressive nature made him reluctant to accept responsibility for his actions. His continued attempts to justify or minimize his behavior provided additional evidence of the attitudes that had led to the investigation in the first place. His refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing would ultimately work against him during the formal proceedings. Sarah's debriefing with Colonel Rodriguez and other senior officers was comprehensive and detailed. Every aspect of the mission was reviewed to ensure that proper procedures had been followed and that the evidence gathered would be admissible in court proceedings. Her performance was noted as exemplary, demonstrating both tactical excellence and adherence to legal requirements. The investigation revealed that this group of Marines had been involved in similar incidents on at least 6 previous occasions over the past 8 months. Civilian women had filed complaints, but the Marines had been careful to target victims who were unlikely to pursue formal charges or whose credibility could be questioned. Sarah's mission had finally provided the irrefutable evidence needed to bring them to justice. Major General Williams addressed all 5 Marines together before they were transported to the base detention facility. Her words were measured and professional, explaining that their actions had not only violated military law, but had also dishonored the Marine Corps and undermined public trust in the military. The consequences would be severe and appropriate to the seriousness of their misconduct. The formal charges filed against the 5 Marines included conspiracy to commit assault, attempted sexual assault, conduct unbecoming a Marine, and violation of civilian rights under color of military authority. Torres and Mitchell faced additional charges of leadership failure and corruption of subordinates. The evidence was so overwhelming that plea negotiations began almost immediately. Sarah's role in the investigation remained classified to protect her identity and preserve her ability to conduct similar operations in the future. The official record indicated only that an undercover federal agent had been used to gather evidence, with no details about her specific identity or background. This protection was essential for both her safety and her continued effectiveness as an operator. The courts-martial proceedings were swift and decisive. Torres received a dishonorable discharge, reduction in rank to private, forfeiture of all pay and benefits, and 18 months in military prison. Mitchell received similar punishment with an additional 6 months for his continued resistance and refusal to accept responsibility. The 3 junior Marines received lesser, but still career-ending punishments appropriate to their level of participation. The base implemented new training programs focused on respect for civilian rights and proper conduct during interactions with non-military personnel. Major General Williams used the incident as a teaching opportunity, ensuring that all personnel understood that misconduct would not be tolerated regardless of rank or previous service record. Sarah returned to her regular duties with her SEAL unit, her mission having demonstrated once again why the Navy's most elite operators are called upon for the most sensitive and important assignments. Her ability to maintain cover while gathering crucial evidence had prevented these Marines from victimizing additional civilians and had restored faith in the military's commitment to justice and accountability. The civilian women who had previously filed complaints against the group were contacted and informed that their reports had been vindicated and that the responsible parties had been held accountable. Several expressed gratitude that someone had finally believed their accounts and taken appropriate action to prevent future incidents. The success of Sarah's mission led to the development of new protocols for investigating similar complaints involving military personnel. The techniques and procedures she had employed were studied and refined to create a systematic approach for addressing misconduct that might otherwise be difficult to prove through conventional investigation methods. Torres and Mitchell were ultimately imprisoned at the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth, where they would have ample time to reflect on how their sense of entitlement and abuse of authority had destroyed their military careers and personal futures. Their former positions of trust and responsibility were filled by Marines who understood that leadership meant protecting and serving others, not exploiting them. The 3 junior Marines were processed out of the service with other than honorable discharges that would follow them for the rest of their lives, affecting their employment prospects and veterans' benefits eligibility. Their cases served as clear examples to other personnel that following orders or peer pressure was not an acceptable excuse for participating in misconduct. Sarah's expertise and professionalism had once again proven that the most challenging missions often require not just physical courage and tactical skill, but also intelligence, adaptability, and unwavering commitment to justice. Her half-minute response to the Marines' aggression had ended their criminal behavior and demonstrated why Navy SEALs are considered among the world's most capable military operators. The training area where the incident occurred was later renamed in honor of the civilian victims who had shown courage in reporting the Marines' misconduct despite knowing they might not be believed. A small plaque reminded all who passed that protecting the innocent and upholding justice are fundamental responsibilities of all military personnel, regardless of their rank or assignment. Years later, when Sarah reflected on the mission, she took satisfaction not in the combat skills she had displayed, but in the fact that her actions had prevented unknown numbers of future victims from suffering at the hands of those 5 Marines. The half-minute that changed everything had been the culmination of years of training, but more importantly, it had been a moment when training, justice, and courage combined to achieve something truly meaningful.